I never expected my life to unravel like this. At least not the way it did on that particular day. You see, when you marry someone, there's this unspoken belief that no matter what life throws at you, you're in it together. That belief shattered into a million pieces the moment my wife, Clara, demanded a divorce. Let me set the scene for you. It was a week after my father-in-law, Robert, had been laid to rest. The man was a legend, self-made, disciplined, and surprisingly kind to a fault despite his stoic exterior. He was the type who spoke more through action than words, and those actions built an empire worth millions. Now, I knew Clara had her issues with him. She always complained about how he never let her live her life. But this? I wasn't prepared for this level of betrayal. Clara stood there in the living room, arms crossed, a smug smile curling her lips. Her voice was sharp when she said it. I want a divorce. At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed. Can you believe that? I actually laughed. Come on, Clara, I said. What are you talking about? We just buried your father. Shouldn't we be talking about how we move forward together? But the look on her face told me this wasn't a joke. It wasn't even a spur-of-the-moment decision. No, this was calculated, planned, and executed with surgical precision. You're useless to me now, she said, her words cutting like a blade. I don't need you anymore. Useless? That word echoed in my mind, stinging more than I'd care to admit. Useless. After all these years of standing by her side, supporting her when she felt lost, believing in her when even she didn't believe in herself, I was useless? And then it hit me. The $379 million inheritance. She had already begun to think of herself as untouchable, invincible even. That money, she believed, was her golden ticket out of this marriage. I looked at her, trying to keep my composure. I'll admit, it wasn't easy. The anger, the betrayal, it was all boiling under the surface. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. No, if she wanted to play this game, I'd let her. All right, I said, keeping my tone light, almost amused. If that's what you want, then fine. I'll sign the papers. But just remember one thing, Clara. Don't regret this later. LOL. Yes, I said LOL. You should have seen her face. She probably thought I'd beg, cry, or try to talk her out of it. Instead, I gave her what she wanted. I signed those papers without hesitation, handed them back to her, and walked out of the house. I didn't even pack my things. What was the point? Clara had made it abundantly clear where I stood in her world. Now, I'll be honest with you. Walking away wasn't easy. That house? It wasn't just a building. It was the place where I had invested my love, my hopes, and my dreams for our future. It was where I thought we'd grow old together, but clearly, I was the only one who felt that way. And as I left, I couldn't help but laugh a little. Not out of humor, but because I knew something she didn't. Clara thought she had won, that she had all the cards in her hand. But what she didn't realize was that the deck she was holding wasn't even real. As I walked down the street, I thought about Robert. The man had always been a step ahead of everyone, and I had a feeling this time wouldn't be any different. There was no way he'd hand over $379 million to someone as reckless and entitled as Clara without putting safeguards in place. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew enough about Robert to trust that he had planned for this exact scenario. So, as Clara celebrated her supposed victory, I let her. Let her believe she had it all. Let her think she was free of me, of any responsibility, and on her way to a life of luxury. Because sooner or later, reality was going to hit her like a freight train. And when it did, I wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces. No, this time, Clara was on her own. You'd think by now I'd have seen the cracks in the foundation of my marriage. But no. Hindsight is a cruel teacher, isn't it? Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. Little moments, subtle words, fleeting expressions that hinted at who Clara really was. I just didn't want to see it. Let me take you back to the beginning. When Clara and I first met, she had this charm, a magnetism that could draw anyone in. She was witty, elegant, and had a spark in her eyes that made you feel like the luckiest man alive if you caught her attention. And I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. At the time, I was doing well for myself. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was comfortable. I had a solid job, a modest home, and a steady routine. Clara, on the other hand, was floundering. She was 30, unemployed, and still living off the occasional allowance her father sent her way. She tried a few things: freelance writing, some vague consulting work, even a short stint as a boutique manager, but nothing ever stuck. When we started dating, I didn't see her lack of ambition as a red flag. If anything, I saw it as an opportunity to support her, to help her find her footing. She had potential, I told myself. She just needed someone to believe in her. And for a while, it seemed like I was right. Clara was sweet, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life together. But there was one constant shadow in her life: her father, Robert. Robert was the polar opposite of Clara. He was disciplined, pragmatic, and incredibly successful. He had built his wealth from scratch, often working 16-hour days and making sacrifices Clara couldn't even begin to comprehend. And boy, did she resent him for it. "He never cared about me," she'd say, bitterness dripping from her words. "All he ever cared about was his stupid businesses." Even when I was a kid, it was always, "Clara, be responsible. Clara, work hard. Clara, save your money." Like I'm some kind of investment instead of his daughter. I didn't know how to respond to that. From where I stood, Robert seemed like a good man. He might have been strict, but he cared. He sent her money when she needed it, gave her advice, even if she didn't want it, and made sure she was always taken care of. But Clara only saw it as control, and she hated him for it. Despite her complaints, Robert was a looming presence in our relationship. He had this way of making you feel both impressed and intimidated. The few times we met, he was polite, even warm, but I could tell he was sizing me up, evaluating whether I was good enough for his daughter. "Take care of her," he told me once. "She needs stability." I promised him I would. I meant it too. But I don't think even Robert knew how deep Clara's entitlement ran. After we got married, it became clear that Clara had no interest in contributing to our life together. I worked long hours to pay the bills while she spent her days shopping, meeting friends for lunch, and scrolling through social media. Every now and then, she'd talk about getting a job or starting a project, but nothing ever came of it. At first, I brushed it off. "She's adjusting," I told myself. "Marriage is a big change. She'll find her rhythm eventually." But as months turned into years, I realized that wasn't going to happen. Still, I held on. I loved her, and I believed in us. I thought if I just gave her enough time and support, she'd figure things out. But deep down, I think I always knew the truth. Clara didn't want a partnership. She wanted a free ride. Things got worse as her resentment toward Robert grew. She'd complain endlessly about how he was hoarding wealth while she struggled to enjoy life. Never mind that she wasn't struggling, at least not financially. Between the allowance Robert still sent her and my steady income, Clara had everything she needed. But it was never enough. She'd talk about how things would change once Robert was gone. "He thinks he can control me with money," she'd say. "But when he's gone, I'll finally be free." It made me uneasy, hearing her talk like that. I chalked it up to frustration, but looking back, it was something more. Clara wasn't just waiting for her father to pass away. She was banking on it. I should have seen the warning signs then. The entitlement, the bitterness, the way she always blamed other people for her problems. It was all there, plain as day. But I ignored it, convinced that love was enough to make everything work. And so, I kept working, kept supporting her, kept believing in a future that, as it turns out, was never meant to be. You know, there's a specific kind of arrogance that money brings out in certain people, the kind that isn't even rooted in actual possession, but in the mere belief that the money is theirs. That was Clara after Robert's funeral. She acted like she'd already won the lottery, and in her mind, I was just the extra baggage she needed to unload before starting her real life. The change in her demeanor was instant. I mean, we were barely back from the funeral when Clara started planning her lavish future. It wasn't grief that filled the room those days. It was entitlement, pure and simple. She'd walk around the house with this air of self-importance, already talking about renovations, new cars, and vacations. "Once the estate clears, I'm hiring an interior designer, she said one evening, scrolling through photos of luxury villas on her phone. This house has so much potential, don't you think? The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who spent years complaining about how small and boring our house was. But now that she thought she was rich, it was suddenly a diamond in the rough. At first, I stayed quiet, letting her talk. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, watching her weave these elaborate dreams without a single clue about what was actually waiting for her. She'd flip through catalogs, muttering about marble countertops and crystal chandeliers, all while completely ignoring the fact that our marriage was falling apart right in front of her. And then it happened. The conversation that shattered whatever was left of our fragile relationship. We were sitting in the living room when Clara, without any preamble, dropped the bombshell. I think it's time we go our separate ways. I blinked, genuinely confused. Separate ways? What are you talking about? I want a divorce, she said, her tone so casual you'd think she was asking me to pass the salt. I leaned back, trying to process her words. Why? Why now? Clara sighed, as though the mere act of explaining herself was an inconvenience. Look, James, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I've been thinking about this for a while. Well, I don't need you anymore. You've been great, but let's be honest, you're not exactly indispensable. Indispensable. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. For years, I had been her rock. I paid the bills, cooked the meals, and cleaned up the messes, both literal and metaphorical. But now, because she thought she had a $379 million safety net, I was suddenly disposable? I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I forced myself to stay calm. So, this is it then? You think a pile of money is going to solve all your problems? Her eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a sharp edge. Don't act like this is some big betrayal. You've known for years that this marriage wasn't working. I deserve a chance to be happy, James. And frankly, I can't do that with you holding me back. Holding her back. That was rich coming from someone who had done absolutely nothing to support herself in all the years we'd been together. But I wasn't going to argue with her. Not anymore. All right, I said, keeping my tone even. If that's what you want, then fine. I'll sign the papers. She looked taken aback, like she expected me to beg or fight to change her mind. But why would I? Clara had made it perfectly clear that I was just a placeholder in her life, a temporary convenience until something better came along. As I signed the papers, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. Yes, it hurt to see how little I meant to her, but at the same time, I knew I was better off without her. Before I handed the papers back, I paused and looked her in the eye. Just one piece of advice, Clara. Don't regret this later. LOL. Her lips curled into a sneer. Trust me, I won't. She didn't even wait for me to leave. As I walked out the door, I could hear her on the phone, talking excitedly about a luxury spa retreat she wanted to book to celebrate. Celebrating what, exactly? Losing a husband who would have walked through fire for her? Gambling her entire future on an inheritance she hadn't even read the fine print on? But I let her have her moment. Let her revel in her supposed victory. After all, what Clara didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the $379 million she was banking on wasn't exactly what she thought it was. And soon enough, reality would come knocking, shattering her little fantasy into pieces. You know that moment in movies where the villain, standing on top of the world, suddenly realizes the ground beneath them isn't as solid as they thought? That's exactly what happened to Clara when she met with Robert's lawyer. By this point, Clara was on cloud nine. She'd strutted into the lawyer's office like a queen arriving at her coronation. She wore her best designer outfit, probably something she'd bought with my money before the divorce, and carried herself with this smug confidence, like the world owed her everything it had to offer. I wasn't there, of course, but I can imagine how it all went down. Clara probably didn't even bother with pleasantries. She wasn't interested in legal jargon or family formalities. She was there for one thing and one thing only. The $379 million she believed was her birthright. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Grayson, was an old friend of Robert's. He'd handled the family's legal matters for decades, and he wasn't one to suffer fools lightly. Clara, however, didn't realize this. Let's cut to the chase, Mr. Grayson. I can almost hear her saying, I know my father's estate was substantial, and as his only child, I assume the bulk of it belongs to me. So, if we could just finalize the paperwork, that would be great. Grayson, to his credit, didn't react. The man was a master of composure. Instead, he handed Clara a copy of the will. Have you read this document thoroughly, Mrs. Emerson? He asked. Clara waved a dismissive hand. I glanced at it. My father's estate is worth $379 million, correct? That's all I need to know. That's when it happened. Grayson chuckled. Not a polite chuckle, mind you. This was the kind of laughter you'd expect from someone who knows a secret that's about to change your life forever. Clara froze. What's so funny? She demanded, her voice tinged with irritation. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and pity. Mrs. Emerson, I suggest you take a closer look at the terms of the will. The estate is indeed worth $379 million, but there are conditions. Conditions? Clara's confidence began to waver. Yes, Grayson said, opening the will to a specific page. Your father, as you know, was a meticulous man. He believed in hard work and responsibility. As such, he outlined a series of requirements that must be met before you can access the full inheritance. What kind of requirements? Clara asked, her voice rising. Grayson explained calmly, as though he'd done this countless times before. To access the funds, you must meet the following conditions: secure full-time employment, complete a financial management course, and maintain both for a minimum of 5 years. Only then will the trust be fully unlocked. Clara's face must have drained of all color at that moment. You're joking, she said. That's ridiculous. I'm his daughter. I shouldn't have to earn what's rightfully mine. Grayson didn't flinch. Your father was quite clear on this matter. He believed it was important for you to develop the skills necessary to manage such a large sum of money. He wanted to ensure you wouldn't squander it. The room must have gone silent then, save for Clara's shallow breathing. All her grand plans, renovations, vacations, luxury cars, were slipping through her fingers like sand. And what if I don't meet these conditions? She asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Grayson closed the will with a quiet thud. If you fail to meet the conditions within 5 years, the trust will be dissolved, and the entire estate will be donated to charity. Charity? Clara practically screamed. You're telling me I could lose everything? Grayson nodded. That's correct. Clara was stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In her mind, the inheritance was hers, no strings attached. The idea that she'd have to work for it, after years of avoiding any real responsibility, was unthinkable. But the final blow was yet to come. Grayson leaned forward, his expression softening just slightly. There's one more thing, he said. Your father also allocated a portion of the estate, 20%, to be exact, to James. If Clara was pale before, she was now as white as a sheet. James? My ex-husband? Why would he get anything? Your father appreciated James' care and respect, particularly during his final years, Grayson explained. He believed James demonstrated the values he hoped to see in you. Clara couldn't speak. She had come into that office expecting to leave as a millionaire, only to find herself saddled with a to-do list and a fraction of what she thought she deserved. As for James, well, that's me. I wasn't surprised when Grayson called to let me know about the 20%. I thanked him and told him to give Clara my regards. After all, I warned her not to regret this later. I have to admit, when I got the call from Mr. Grayson, Robert's lawyer, I already had a pretty good idea of what had happened in his office. I could practically hear Clara's screeches through the phone line, even though I wasn't there. But hearing Grayson lay it all out for me, piece by piece, was satisfying. Not because I enjoy seeing people suffer, okay, maybe a little, but because it was the ultimate validation. Everything Robert had said, everything Clara had ignored, was coming back to bite her. Let's rewind for a moment. Robert wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist. The man didn't leave anything to chance, especially not his $379 million estate. He once told me over a cup of coffee, James, money is like fire. It can warm you if you respect it, or it can burn you if you don't. I didn't realize then how much weight those words carried. Now, Clara? She treated money like it was her birthright, not something she had to earn or respect. She assumed her inheritance was a golden parachute that would whisk her away to a life of luxury without effort. And that's where Robert's brilliance shone through. He didn't just leave her $379 million. He left her a challenge, and a brutal one at that. Grayson explained the details to me during our call. Your ex-wife didn't read the will, did she? He asked, amusement dripping from his tone. Not a chance, I replied. She probably skimmed the first page and assumed she hit the jackpot. Grayson chuckled. Well, she's in for a rude awakening. The trust fund is locked until she meets the conditions outlined by your father-in-law. Full-time employment, financial management training, and maintaining both for 5 years. I let out a low whistle. 5 years? That's going to feel like 5 decades for Clara. Exactly, Grayson said. Robert believed that wealth without discipline is a recipe for disaster. He wanted her to understand the value of hard work and responsibility before gaining access to such a significant amount of money. It was genius, really. Robert knew his daughter better than anyone, and he'd crafted a plan that would either force her to grow up or ensure his money went somewhere it could do real good, charity. But Grayson wasn't done. There's one more thing you should know, he said. Oh? What's that? Robert left you a portion of the estate as well. 20%, to be exact. I almost dropped the phone. 20%? Are you serious? Quite serious. Robert valued the respect and care you showed him, especially in his final years. He wanted to ensure you were recognized for that. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I was grateful. On the other, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. This wasn't my money. It was Robert's legacy. But then again, he'd made his wishes clear, and I wasn't about to argue with a dead man's wisdom. As I processed this information, my mind wandered to Clara. She must have been losing her mind. For her, the conditions of the trust fund weren't just inconvenient, they were catastrophic. Clara had spent her entire life avoiding responsibility. Now, if she wanted access to the fortune she'd been banking on, she'd have to do the one thing she despised, work. And that wasn't all. The fact that I, her useless ex-husband, had been granted 20% of the estate was the ultimate insult. Robert might as well have reached out from the grave and said, "Grow up, Clara. Learn from someone who understands the value of hard work." I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Clara had spent years complaining about Robert's strictness, calling him stingy and controlling. But in the end, his discipline was what made him successful, and his wisdom ensured his wealth wouldn't be squandered. Now, here's the kicker. The trust fund wasn't just a lesson for Clara. It was a testament to Robert's character, his belief in accountability, and his refusal to let his fortune ruin the people he cared about. I hung up the phone feeling a strange mix of vindication and closure. Clara had always seen Robert as an obstacle, someone who stood between her and the life she thought she deserved. But now, she was facing the harsh reality that he was the only one who truly understood her potential, and the only one who was willing to push her toward it. As for me, I wasn't going to gloat. Okay, maybe I'd enjoy the thought of her trying to figure out how to hold down a job for 5 years. But mostly, I felt free. Free from Clara's entitlement, free from her constant criticism, and free to move on with my life. And the $40,000 I'd eventually receive from Robert's will? That wasn't just money, it was a reminder. A reminder that integrity, respect, and hard work matter. I'll admit, part of me wished I could have been a fly on the wall when the truth hit Clara like a freight train. The Clara I knew didn't handle disappointment well. She had always been someone who avoided responsibility and thrived on entitlement, and now she was facing a reality she couldn't manipulate her way out of. After learning about the conditions in Robert's will, Clara's world must have felt like it was collapsing around her. I could imagine her sitting across from Mr. Grayson, her face pale, her hands shaking, and her voice rising in that panicked tone she used whenever things didn't go her way. "What do you mean I have to work? That's absurd." I can hear her saying, "I'm his daughter. That money belongs to me." Grayson, ever calm and professional, likely responded with something like, "Mrs. Emerson, your father made his intentions very clear. He wanted to ensure his wealth would be used responsibly. These conditions are non-negotiable. For someone like Clara, who had spent her life avoiding anything resembling hard work, this must have felt like a cruel joke. She had built up this fantasy in her head, a fantasy where she was free to indulge every whim without consequence. But now, that fantasy was crumbling, leaving her with nothing but frustration and regret. When Grayson revealed that I'd been given 20% of the estate, I could practically see Clara's blood boiling. The very idea that I, the useless ex-husband she had discarded without a second thought, was deemed worthy of her father's respect must have been unbearable for her. "What does he get 20% for?" she probably demanded. "He's not even part of this family anymore." Grayson, unbothered, likely reminded her of the respect I had shown Robert during his final years, a respect Clara herself had never given him. That must have stung. And the best part? She couldn't do a thing about it. The will was ironclad, meticulously crafted to prevent any legal challenges. Clara had no choice but to accept the terms, no matter how unfair they seemed to her. But the real blow came later, after the meeting. Clara's arrogance had been stripped away, leaving her with nothing but the harsh reality of her situation. She was jobless, divorced, and now faced with the daunting task of meeting the conditions of the trust fund. I'm sure she spent days pacing around the house, trying to figure out her next move. She probably thought about contesting the will, but deep down, she knew it was futile. Robert's lawyer would have anticipated every possible argument, and Clara didn't have the resources or the energy to fight a losing battle. At some point, regret must have started creeping in. Clara had burned every bridge she had, believing the $379 million would make her untouchable. Now, she was left with nothing but a list of conditions she wasn't remotely prepared to meet. And let's not forget the humiliation. Clara had spent years mocking Robert for his discipline, calling him stingy and out of touch. Now, she was being forced to embrace the very values she had spent her life rejecting. It was poetic justice, really. I imagine Clara sat alone in that big house, staring at the trust fund paperwork, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She probably thought back to our marriage, to the life we had built together, and realized that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated me. Of course, she'd never admit it. Clara was too proud for that. But the signs of her regret were clear enough. The desperate texts she sent me, the half-hearted attempts to check in after the divorce, those were all the proof I needed. I didn't respond to her messages. What was the point? Clara had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little satisfaction knowing she was finally experiencing what it meant to take responsibility for her actions. For once in her life, Clara was being held accountable, and there was no one left to bail her out. Meanwhile, I was moving forward, free from Clara's entitlement, free from her constant complaints, and free to rebuild my life on my own terms. As for Clara, I have no doubt she's still struggling to come to terms with her new reality. Maybe she's trying to find a job. Maybe she's taking the financial management course her father required. Or maybe she's just sitting in that house, wallowing in regret and wondering how she let it all slip through her fingers. Whatever she's doing, one thing is certain. She'll never forget the day her fantasies came crashing down, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of regret. You know, looking back, the strangest thing is how come I felt. I just walked out of a marriage that had been falling apart for years, left behind a house filled with empty promises, and now I was hearing that my ex-wife, Clara, had pretty much detonated her entire future. And yet, I wasn't angry or bitter. I was relieved. The truth is, the divorce wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by Clara's entitlement, her constant complaints, or her ever-growing list of unrealistic expectations. I was free to focus on myself, on what I wanted, without having to clean up someone else's mess. But let's rewind a bit. After I heard from Mr. Grayson about the will, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led up to this point. Robert, my late father-in-law, had always been a man of discipline and principle. He didn't throw money around or indulge in unnecessary luxuries, and while Clara saw that as stinginess, I saw it as wisdom. Robert once told me, "James, People who inherit wealth without earning it never respect it. It's like handing them fire. They'll either let it go out or burn themselves with it. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation, but now I realized he had been preparing me for this very moment. Clara, on the other hand, had spent her life chasing the illusion of wealth without ever understanding its value. She thought money would solve all her problems, but she didn't realize that money without purpose is nothing more than numbers in a bank account. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clara had mocked me for years, calling me boring and unambitious because I believed in working hard and living within my means. And yet, here I was, holding steady, while she was flailing in the aftermath of her own arrogance. I wasn't gloating, okay, maybe I was a little, but mostly, I felt validated. All the years I spent trying to support Clara, to encourage her to take responsibility for her life, weren't wasted after all. Robert had seen what I saw in her, and he'd put safeguards in place to make sure his legacy wasn't squandered. And then there was the 20% inheritance Robert left me. At first, I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me thought I didn't deserve it. After all, it was Robert's money, not mine. But another part of me realized it wasn't just about the money. It was about the respect Robert had for me, for the way I treated him and his values. That inheritance wasn't just a financial gift. It was a recognition of the bond we had shared. I decided to use the money wisely. I wasn't going to blow it on flashy cars or expensive vacations. Instead, I invested it in my future. I put some of it into my savings, used a portion to start my own business, and donated a chunk to a charity Robert had supported in his lifetime. It felt like the right thing to do, like a way to honor his memory. As for Clara, well, I heard bits and pieces about her life through mutual acquaintances. She wasn't doing great, to put it mildly. The conditions of the trust fund were proving to be more than she could handle. She tried to find a job, but quickly realized that a lifetime of avoiding responsibility doesn't exactly prepare you for the workforce. From what I heard, she took the financial management course her father required, but even that was a struggle. Clara had never been one for discipline, and trying to force herself into a structured environment was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. The same arrogance that had driven her to demand a divorce was now the very thing holding her back. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Free from Clara's constant negativity, I found myself with a renewed sense of purpose. My career took off, my business began to grow, and I even reconnected with old friends who drifted away during the chaos of my marriage. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. And you know what the best part was? The quiet. No more arguments, no more passive-aggressive comments, no more walking on eggshells to avoid triggering one of Clara's tantrums. Just peace. Occasionally, I'd think about Robert and the lessons he'd taught me, not just through his words, but through his actions. He'd shown me the importance of discipline, integrity, and respect, and those lessons had become the foundation of my new life. So, while Clara was busy trying to figure out how to meet the trust fund's conditions, I was busy building something real, something meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It didn't take long for Clara's downfall to begin. Honestly, I'd be lying if I said I didn't see it coming. You can't spend your entire life coasting on other people's efforts and expect to suddenly succeed when the safety net disappears. The conditions of Robert's will were like a reality check she never wanted but desperately needed. From what I heard, her first challenge was finding a job. For someone who had never held a stable position in her life, this was a monumental task. Clara, the same woman who once sneered at my 9-to-5 job as unimaginative, was now scouring job boards and sending out resumes. The irony was almost poetic, but her arrogance, even in the face of adversity, made things worse. Instead of humbling herself and starting small, Clara aimed for positions she had no qualifications for: executive roles, senior management, anything that sounded prestigious. When the inevitable rejection emails came flooding in, she was baffled. "What do they mean I'm not qualified?" she probably muttered, glaring at her laptop screen. "I'm Robert Emerson's daughter." The entitlement that had been her shield all her life was now her biggest obstacle. Employers weren't interested in her family name. They wanted experience, skills, and a strong work ethic, none of which Clara possessed. Eventually, she lowered her expectations and applied for entry-level positions, but even those were a struggle. She lacked the basic discipline required to succeed in any role. Clara wasn't used to taking orders or following through on tasks. She'd spent her life delegating, avoiding, and blaming others when things went wrong. Then came the financial management course, another condition of the trust fund. I heard through the grapevine that Clara approached it with the same disdain she had for work. To her, it was just another hoop to jump through, a box to check so she could get her hands on the money. But the course wasn't just about showing up. It required effort, focus, and an understanding of concepts she had no interest in learning. She failed the first module, and the second, and the third. Each failure chipped away at the confidence she had once worn like armor. For the first time, Clara was facing a world that didn't bend to her will, and it was breaking her. Her lifestyle began to crumble, too. Without access to the $379 million she thought was hers, Clara had to rely on what little money she had left. The expensive spa treatments, shopping sprees, and fancy dinners that once defined her life were replaced with budgeting apps and meal prep. She even sold off a few of her designer handbags to make ends meet. I can't imagine how humiliating that must have been for her. Clara, the self-proclaimed queen of luxury, reduced to clipping coupons and shopping in discount stores. But the worst part, from what I understand, was the isolation. Clara had burned so many bridges in her pursuit of wealth and independence that when things started falling apart, she had no one to turn to. Her so-called friends, the ones who had cheered her on when she divorced me, vanished the moment her money ran out. It's funny how quickly people disappear when you're no longer useful to them. Clara learned that the hard way. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The trust fund conditions gave her 5 years to secure a job, complete the financial course, and maintain both consistently. But each failure, each misstep, made the goal seem further and further out of reach. I heard she tried to contest the will at one point, claiming the conditions were unfair. Of course, the case didn't go anywhere. Robert had been meticulous in crafting the will, and there was no legal loophole for Clara to exploit. She was stuck, and she knew it. Every now and then, I'd hear snippets about her from mutual acquaintances. "She's struggling," they'd say. "She's not doing well." I never asked for details. I didn't need to. Clara's downfall wasn't something I wanted to gloat over. It was just a natural consequence of the choices she had made. Still, there was a part of me that hoped she'd learn something from all this. Maybe the struggle would force her to grow up, to finally take responsibility for her life. But deep down, I knew better. Clara had spent so long blaming everyone else for her problems that I doubted she even knew how to look in the mirror and see the truth. By the end of the first year, the cracks in her life were fully exposed. She was jobless, broke, and alone, clinging to the faint hope that she might somehow turn things around before the 5-year deadline. But if you ask me, the real tragedy wasn't that Clara had failed to meet the conditions of the trust fund. It was that she had failed to see the opportunity in front of her. Robert's will wasn't just about money. It was about growth, responsibility, and redemption. It was a chance for Clara to prove to herself and to the world that she was more than just a spoiled, entitled heiress. Unfortunately, Clara wasn't ready to take that chance. And by the time she realized it, it was already too late. While Clara was stumbling through the wreckage of her life, I was finally starting to rebuild mine. Walking away from her and that toxic marriage had been the best decision I'd ever made. It was as though a weight had been lifted, and I could finally see the path ahead of me clearly. Robert's unexpected 20% inheritance gave me a sense of security I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was what it symbolized. Robert's acknowledgement of my efforts and values meant more than any dollar figure, and I wasn't going to squander it. I invested wisely, putting some of the money into starting my own consulting business. It wasn't flashy, but it was something I had always wanted to do. I spent years honing my skills in sales and management, and now I was finally working for myself. Watching my business grow was deeply fulfilling in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. My personal life blossomed, too. Without Clara's negativity dragging me down, I found myself reconnecting with old friends, and forming new relationships. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I was living, not just surviving. Meanwhile, Clara's life continued to spiral. She had exhausted her options. The trust fund's conditions proved insurmountable, and each failure seemed to tighten the noose around her aspirations. By the end of the second year, her attempts to secure a job had dwindled to nothing. Employers didn't want someone with no experience and an entitled attitude, and Clara wasn't willing to start at the bottom. The financial management course? That was a disaster, too. Clara's disdain for discipline meant she never took it seriously, and she failed multiple times before finally giving up. The countdown to the 5-year deadline was moving faster than she realized, and with every passing day, her chances of accessing the trust fund faded further into the distance. By year 3, her financial situation had deteriorated significantly. The money she once thought would last forever was gone, spent on trying to maintain a lifestyle she could no longer afford. The big house, the designer clothes, the spa treatments, all of it disappeared. From what I heard, she ended up moving into a small apartment, barely scraping by on what little she had left. Her social circle had evaporated, too. The friends who had celebrated her independence after the divorce were nowhere to be found. It turns out they weren't interested in Clara without the promise of lavish dinners and shopping trips. Alone and isolated, she had no one to turn to. I'd hear snippets about her occasionally, how she was struggling, how she'd become a shadow of the woman she once was. I didn't go looking for these updates, but people love to talk. "You dodged a bullet with that one," a former colleague said to me once. "She's really hit rock bottom." I nodded, offering a polite smile, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. By then, Clara wasn't even a part of my life anymore, just a distant memory of a chapter I'd long since closed. As the 5-year deadline approached, the inevitable happened. Clara failed to meet the conditions of the trust, and the $379 million was forfeited. The money went to charity, just as Robert had planned. Clara, the woman who had built her life on the assumption that wealth would always be within her grasp, was left with nothing. I imagine that moment must have been crushing for her. All the dreams she'd had, all the plans she'd made, gone in an instant. She'd spent years blaming others for her problems, but now there was no one left to blame. As for me, life was good. My business was thriving, and I had found a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. The lessons I learned from Robert about discipline, respect, and the value of hard work had become the foundation of my success. One day, I received a letter. It was from Clara. The handwriting was shaky, almost unrecognizable, but the message was clear. She was asking for help, not money, but advice. "I don't know what to do anymore," she wrote. "I've made so many mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I don't know who else to turn to." I stared at the letter for a long time before putting it away. Clara had burned every bridge, including ours. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I'd moved past that, but I wasn't going to step back into her chaos. The truth is, Clara's downfall wasn't about the money or the trust fund. It was about her refusal to take responsibility for her life. She had every opportunity to grow, to change, to build something meaningful, but she chose to cling to her entitlement instead. And me? I chose to move forward. I rented a modest condo, invested my inheritance wisely, and focused on building a life I could be proud of. The $40,000 I received from Robert's estate remains untouched in my account, a reminder of the man who taught me that wealth is meaningless without integrity. Clara may have turned pale when she heard the truth about the will, but I walked away with something far more valuable: freedom. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. My wife Serena had just made partner at Lockridge and Crane, the high-powered corporate law firm she worshipped like a religion. She'd worked late nights, skipped vacations, and missed birthdays just to get that fancy corner office. Tonight was her victory lap, and she'd invited her whole family to bask in the glow. The place was one of those modern steakhouses downtown where the wine list was longer than the menu, and everyone looked like they belonged in a glossy magazine. Serena had picked the table near the big window, the one with a view of the skyline, her skyline, and she was already holding court by the time I arrived. Her father, Raymond, was there, his gray hair perfectly parted and his navy blazer sharp as ever. He'd been a senator before retiring to a boardroom and a second marriage. Next to him, her mother Francine swirled her wine like it held the answers to the universe. She'd always been polite, but there was a glassy quality to her kindness, like she was performing even when no one was watching. Camille, Serena's younger sister, had flown in from LA just to be here. She was the free spirit, the yoga instructor with 1 million Instagram followers and a wardrobe that looked stolen from a Coachella ad. Serena's smile was electric as she made her toast. "I just made partner," she beamed, raising her glass. "While my husband is just a plumber." Everyone laughed. Even Camille, who'd never worked a day in her life, let out this high-pitched giggle that made my stomach clench. I looked at Serena, but she didn't see me. She saw the version of me she'd crafted, the simple husband with the blue-collar job that gave her story texture. She loved to tell people I was a plumber, like it made her success more impressive by comparison. I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. I clinked my glass with hers and took a sip of water, letting the burn of disappointment settle into my chest. Serena had always loved the narrative. "Micah, the guy who fixes pipes," she'd say at parties, her tone dripping with affectionate condescension. I'd laugh it off because it was easier than explaining the truth. I didn't mind the work boots or the wrench in my trunk. I'd always believed there was dignity in every job, but I also knew the world didn't see it that way. The waiter came around with a tray of appetizers. I reached for a shrimp skewer, but my appetite had evaporated. I was too busy watching Serena's eyes shine in the candlelight as she accepted her father's compliments and her mother's praise. "You've always been the smart one," Francine said, her smile stretching tight as a drum. "We knew you'd outgrow all this." She didn't look at me when she said it. I wondered if Serena had told her about the times I'd picked up the slack when she was too exhausted to cook or the nights I'd rubbed her feet after she'd worked 12-hour days. Probably not. That wasn't part of the story. Camille scrolled her phone, showing Serena something that made them both laugh. I wanted to ask what it was, but I learned that sometimes it was better to let them have their bubble. Then Francine's phone buzzed. She picked it up, eyes narrowing, then widening. The blood drained from her face. "Serena," she said, her voice tight. "Why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal?" The room went silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I felt every eye on me, even Serena's, wide and blinking. "What's she talking about?" Serena demanded, her tone sharp, like I'd betrayed some unspoken contract. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, like a secret I'd tucked into the pocket of my work jeans. Francine thrust her phone across the table. The headline was there in bold print. "Ironclad Systems' estimated valuation hits $1 billion amid acquisition rumors." My name wasn't in the headline, but my company's name was. I met Serena's stare, her glass still in midair, her mouth slightly open. "Micah," she said, her voice trembling now. "Is this true?" I nodded once. "Yeah, Ironclad is mine." A flicker of realization crossed her face. The timeline, the secrecy, the long hours I'd spent at the shop. She tried to find words, but I beat her to it. "But I'm just a plumber, remember?" Her glass clinked against the table as she set it down too hard. The room's air turned electric. Camille's phone was still glowing, a half-written caption abandoned. Raymond's face had gone the color of damp concrete. I could see his mind spinning with calculations and regrets. Francine's wineglass trembled in her hand. It was the first time in years I felt like the room was seeing me, the real me. Not the convenient story they'd written about me. Not the footnote to Serena's success. I was the guy who'd quietly built something while they'd been busy polishing their image of themselves. I didn't say another word. I just picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, letting the tension coil tighter around the table. Serena's eyes searched mine for something she didn't recognize. And in that moment, I saw the cracks in her confidence. The dinner had been hers. The celebration had been hers. But the truth was mine, and I'd let it sit there, waiting for the right time to shine. Maybe it wasn't polite. Maybe it wasn't fair. But it was real. And I'd learned long ago that real was better than any story. They didn't know I owned Ironclad Systems, a private B2B infrastructure company that developed AI pipeline diagnostics for municipal and industrial use. My name isn't public. I let my CTO handle all the press. Everyone just assumed I was the guy who fixes pipes, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Even Serena, who once claimed she loved every part of me, the ambition, the intellect, the stubborn streak, had no clue. She built her world on status and titles. Partner at Lockridge and Crane. That was her new identity. Me? I liked my world quieter. I liked the idea that my work was respected in ways that didn't need a title or a plaque on the wall. Ironclad Systems had grown out of a series of late nights at the local library while I was finishing my master's in fluid engineering. I'd been fascinated by the city's aging pipeline systems and the colossal waste that came from leaks, burst mains, and outdated detection methods. Most municipalities were bleeding money fixing problems after they'd already caused millions in damage. I saw a way to change that, so I started coding, sketching, dreaming. I'd built a prototype diagnostic tool that used AI and predictive analytics to flag weaknesses in pipe systems before they turned into emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it saved cities millions. By the time I had my first real contract, a small but forward-thinking water district in Pennsylvania, Serena had just started her first year at Lockridge and Crane. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, so I didn't burden her with the details of what I was building. I'd come home with dirt under my nails and a grin on my face, but she'd be buried in case files, so I'd just kiss her forehead and let her sleep. I kept going, slowly adding engineers and coders to the team. We grew by word of mouth, by delivering results that couldn't be denied. Our technology predicted 83% of urban pipe failures before they happened. The city of Philadelphia alone saved $12 million in 6 months because of Ironclad. But every time we visited her parents, I was the butt of polite jokes about fixing leaks and unclogging drains. Serena didn't correct them. At first, it amused me. I'd sip my drink, smile, and nod along. It was a kind of social camouflage. No one ever asked the plumber to donate to a cause or sit on a board or sponsor a gala. I could observe without being pulled into the endless game of appearances. And I was genuinely curious how people would treat me when they thought I had no power or influence. Spoiler alert, they failed the test. Her father, Raymond, loved to hold court about the stock market, about the political climate, about all the ways the world could be fixed if everyone would just listen to him. He'd look at me like I was the hired help, a nod to the American dream. Serena's blue-collar husband. He'd talk at me, not to me. Her mother, Francine, was more subtle. She'd ask about my day in a tone that suggested she already knew it was uninteresting. Camille. Well, Camille was usually too busy curating her next Instagram post to even notice I was in the room. Serena would pat my knee under the table, a silent apology, but it always felt like a warning. Don't ruin the image. Don't correct the story. Don't step out of place. So I didn't. I let them believe I was the plumber who'd lucked out and married up. Meanwhile, I met with my CTO and CFO in small conference rooms and ironed out licensing deals with water authorities that put 7-figure deposits into our account overnight. I built a company that employed brilliant engineers, coders, and field techs, people who'd grown up thinking their ideas didn't matter. I gave them purpose. And I gave them anonymity too, because Ironclad didn't need a flashy founder to get results. I was content to let the technology speak for itself. But sometimes, when I'd drive home from the lab at 2 in the morning, a warm cup of gas station coffee in the console, I'd think about Serena and how she'd stopped asking about my work altogether. Early on, she'd been curious. She'd ask questions about the technology, the goals, the big picture. But somewhere along the way, the answers stopped matching. She got so caught up in her own climb that she missed the fact I was building something too, something bigger than a corner office or a brass nameplate. I didn't mind, at least not at first. I'd watch her talk about becoming partner like it was the holy grail, and I'd smile and tell her she deserved it. Because she did. She worked hard, sacrificed weekends, turned herself inside out for that firm. But I was working too, just in a different way. And somewhere along the line, it stopped being we and started being her and the plumber. She didn't know I'd already signed deals with major cities across the East Coast. She didn't know we'd been approached by Praxium Holdings about a potential acquisition that would catapult Ironclad's value into the billions. She didn't know that the guy she'd been calling the guy who fixes pipes was on track to become one of the most quietly powerful players in the infrastructure sector. I never corrected her, partly because I wanted to see who she'd become when the money wasn't in front of her, and partly because I wanted to know how it felt to have the truth in my pocket like a secret weapon, not to hurt her, but to remind myself that I hadn't needed her approval to get here. When the Wall Street Journal article dropped, my CFO forwarded it with a one-line email. Looks like the cat's out of the bag. I stared at the headline. Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar underground giant, and felt the weight of every family dinner where I'd played the part. I'd let them all think I was small so they could feel big. I'd let Serena build her story on top of me, brick by brick. And now, every one of those bricks had become part of the empire they'd never seen coming. The plumber. Just a plumber. I smiled. When I met Serena, I was in my final year of grad school, grinding out a master's in fluid engineering while juggling a half-dozen odd jobs to keep the lights on. I did plumbing work on the side, installing water heaters, unclogging drains, and fixing the kind of stuff no one wanted to talk about at dinner parties. I wasn't ashamed of it. I actually liked the problem-solving, the tangible sense of fixing something that others thought was broken. It was honest work, and it paid the bills while I scribbled equations and built prototypes late into the night. Serena was a second-year associate at Lockridge and Crane then, with a smile that could break glass and an ambition that radiated from her like heat off asphalt. She'd come into the cafe where I was working part-time, a stack of legal pads under her arm, too preoccupied with case files to notice the coffee stains on my jeans. I'd liked that about her, the single-minded focus, the way she could dissect a contract like it was a puzzle she was determined to solve. She looked at me over her laptop, eyebrows arched. "What are you reading?" she'd asked, pointing to the engineering textbook next to my half-eaten bagel. That was how it started. She liked my curiosity. I liked her fire. I thought she saw the real me, the one who stayed up all night designing fluid dynamics models, the one who wanted to make cities better, safer, smarter. And at first, she did. We'd meet for quick dinners between shifts, talk about our dreams and the future. She said she liked my ambition, my drive. "You're going places," she'd say, tracing a finger along my jawline, her eyes bright with promise. "We'll be unstoppable together." But somewhere along the way, that narrative shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but I remember it felt like a slow fade, like watching the sunset in reverse. Maybe it was the night she brought me to the Lockridge and Crane holiday party and introduced me as Micah, he's a plumber. The way she said it, like it was a punchline, a sweet little anecdote to show she wasn't shallow, that she could love someone who didn't wear a tie to work. I'd smiled, of course. I'd played along. I told myself it didn't matter because I knew what I was building behind the scenes. But every time she repeated that joke, at dinners, at parties, in casual conversation, I felt a piece of me slip away. Like I'd become the role she needed me to play in the story she was telling herself. Serena, the brilliant corporate lawyer, with a simple, dependable husband who was easy to manage. "You're so simple. So dependable," she'd said one night, her head resting on my shoulder after a long day. Like it was a compliment. Like it was a feature. I'd laughed, but it stuck with me. Simple. Dependable. Like a Labrador retriever. Like I'd been housebroken. Like she'd picked me out of a lineup of options because I'd never stray too far from her shadow. I used to laugh it off because I thought we were stronger than that. I thought she was just tired or stressed, or that the demands of her job had turned her sharper than she meant to be. But the jokes stopped being funny. They became the soundtrack of our marriage. Serena, the overachiever. Micah, the plumber who was easy to overlook. At first, I tried to remind her who I was. I'd mention a new project at work or drop hints about the contracts I was negotiating. But she'd glaze over, her eyes darting back to her phone, to emails from partners and messages from clients. She was too busy winning, and I was too busy letting her. I could have pushed back. I could have corrected her. But part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. I wanted to know if she'd ever look past the image she'd crafted, the convenient stories she'd wrapped around me like a comfortable coat. I wanted to know if she'd ever ask, "Micah, what are you building?" But she never did. She liked the version of me that made her look bigger by comparison. She liked the story where she was the success, and I was the background. Sometimes I'd watch her get ready for work in the morning, all crisp lines and perfect hair, and I'd wonder if she even remembered the guy she met in that cafe, the one with the coffee-stained jeans and the spark in his eye. The guy who wanted to change the world, one pipeline at a time. I never stopped working. While she posted office selfies with espresso cups and captions like "Monday Motivation," I was in the lab with my team, refining AI models that could predict pipe failures down to the street corner. While she was presenting to partners, I was negotiating with city councils and utility boards, signing deals that would change the way cities manage their infrastructure. I was building something real, something that would outlast 1,000 office promotions and 1,000,000 LinkedIn posts. But at the dinner table, at family parties, at the bar with her colleagues, I was just the plumber. And she never corrected them. She never gave me the benefit of the doubt. She never asked what was behind the quiet smile, the tired eyes. She didn't see the hours I put in after midnight, the sacrifices I made, the team I led. To her, I was simple, dependable, forgettable. It's funny how the people who claim to love you can be so blind. Or maybe it's not blindness at all. Maybe it's willful ignorance, a way to keep the story neat and clean, the hierarchy intact. Serena needed that, and I let her have it, because I thought it didn't matter. Because I thought she'd remember who I really was when it counted. Turns out I was wrong. While she posted office selfies with espresso in hand, I quietly built Ironclad with a small team of engineers and coders who believed in the vision even before the world started paying attention. I started with a tiny space, a one-room office with a shared bathroom and a flickering fluorescent light that made it look like the backdrop of a crime scene. But it was mine, and in those four walls, we built something the world didn't see coming. We were the underdogs, working through nights lit by vending machine glow and the hum of servers, drinking too much bad coffee and taking pride in our weird little AI models. We refined our diagnostics algorithm again and again until it was better than any competitors. Our software could predict up to 83% of urban pipe failures before they even happened. Imagine that, city saving millions on repairs and water loss. But no one at Serena's dinner tables asked me about that. No one wanted to know about the hours I spent pitching our tech to local water authorities, or the phone calls to skeptical engineers who'd rather replace a pipe than listen to a guy in jeans talk about artificial intelligence. They just saw Serena's success, the partner's salary, the high heels that clicked with authority, and then they'd glance at me like I'd tagged along, some charity project she'd picked up at the shelter. At those dinners, Serena's father would go on about the stock market, how it was a real man's game, while her mother would sip her third glass of wine and talk about their family's legacy and politics. Like it was an inheritance she couldn't bear to share with someone who worked with his hands. Camille would post selfies, filtered to death, captioned, "Family time with the power couple," like I was some trophy she borrowed for the evening. And every time, Serena would smile and pat my knee under the table, as if that was all it took to keep me content. I started to see it, the way she liked the contrast. She was the high-powered attorney. I was the plumber. It gave her an edge at those dinner parties, made her look like the benevolent one, the star who didn't need to marry her equal because she was that good. But every day, while she curated her brand and worked those late hours, I was in meetings that could change the face of a city's infrastructure. I had contracts with the Department of Water Management and several high-level government agencies. We were revolutionizing how cities managed aging pipes. In Philadelphia, our tech had saved the city $12 million in 6 months. $12 million. That was real money, real impact. And yet, at her parents' house, I was the guy who fixed drains. I remember one night vividly. Her father, leaning back in his chair with a cigar in hand, looked at me and said, "So Micah, when are you going to get serious about your career? Serena's carrying the weight, you know." Serena laughed lightly, not even bothering to defend me. "Dad," she'd said, "Micah's fine. He likes what he does." She said it like I was a child who'd decided finger painting was a career choice. I felt the smile freeze on my face. That was the moment I realized that in their eyes, and maybe even in Serena's, I wasn't building anything. I was just a placeholder, a warm body at the dinner table. I played along because I wanted to see how long it would take before anyone noticed the cracks in their narrative. Spoiler alert, no one did. My team at Ironclad worked in silence, refining and scaling. We put up record numbers and started winning awards, ones with little logos that would have impressed Serena's father if he'd ever cared to ask. But I didn't share the articles. I didn't bring them home. I didn't brag. Because I was watching how everyone treated the man they thought I was. The man who'd married up. The man who should be grateful to be at the table. It's funny how people talk about wanting authenticity, but they can't handle it when it shows up uninvited. I think that's why I kept my success a secret, not just from Serena, but from everyone. I wanted to see who loved me when there was nothing to gain. Spoiler alert, not many did. And every time I sat at that dinner table, a polite smile on my face, nodding along to talk of stock options and vacation homes, I wondered what would happen when the truth came out. When the headlines splashed across their screens and the plumber was suddenly worth more than all their fancy law degrees combined. I wondered how they'd react when the guy they'd pitted turned out to be the one holding the winning hand. I wondered if Serena would still smile the same way when she realized the person she'd married wasn't the narrative she'd sold to her friends. So I sat there, listening to her father's lectures on politics, her mother's bragging, Camille's shallow jokes. I let them talk about my little jobs while I signed multi-million-dollar contracts and negotiated government deals. And in those moments, I learned more than I ever did in any engineering class. People will believe whatever story you hand them, especially if it makes them feel bigger. It was the underestimation principle. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're small. Let them laugh. Because when the truth comes out, their surprise is the sweetest victory. So I sipped my water. I let them laugh. And I smiled, because I knew the day was coming when the plumber would be the one they all wanted to meet. Serena started referring to me as utility class in front of her colleagues. And the first time she said it, I thought I'd misheard. We were at a rooftop cocktail event, one of those slick affairs where everyone wore tailored suits and sipped martinis they barely drank. The skyline stretched behind us, all glass and steel, and I was thinking about the latest contract Ironclad had signed with the city of Boston, another $1 million deal that would take our pipeline diagnostic tech national. I'd planned to share that with Serena that night, maybe let her know just how far her plumber had come. But then she introduced me to her colleague Henry as utility class, and she didn't even blink. He's the utility class, she said with a quick laugh. Keeps things running. Henry smirked, and I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I swallowed it down and shook his hand. Utility class. Like I was a second-tier citizen in her world of polished boardrooms and manicured office plants. She said it lightly, like it was a compliment, like I was part of the system that made her high-powered life function. But I knew the subtext. I'd seen it enough times in her eyes when she scrolled through Instagram, liking photos of the real winners, while ignoring my latest team award. I'd felt it at family dinners when her father bragged about her wins and forgot I was even in the room. The utility class, someone who was there to support, not to lead. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a joke. But the barbs started stacking up. She'd text me things like, "Can you swing by the dry cleaner on your way home?" Utility class hero. Like I was her assistant. Like I didn't have my own empire to run. The final straw came when she left me off the invitation to her firm's retreat in Aspen. We'd been planning to spend a weekend together, a rare chance to reconnect. I'd already rearranged meetings, rescheduled conference calls, told my CTO I'd be offline. But 3 days before the trip, she looked at me across the dinner table and said, "I don't think you'll really fit in there, Micah. It's just lawyers, white shoe crowd. You'd be bored." She said it with that same glossy smile, the one that meant she'd already made the decision and was just giving me the courtesy of a heads up. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever been bored at my investor dinners, or the time she sat through my keynote at the water management conference, pretending to care. But the words died in my throat. I just nodded and said, "Sure. Enjoy yourself." Because I'd learned the hard way that in her world, I was background, an accessory, a neat addition to her narrative about balancing success and humility, the husband who didn't mind being underestimated. I went back to work, back to Ironclad, where my team and I were finalizing a breakthrough update that would revolutionize the way cities monitored their pipelines. We'd landed a contract with the Department of Water Management, a federal pilot program that would put our software into over 100 cities. It was the kind of deal that would make headlines, the kind that would put Ironclad on the map as an industry leader. But at home, I was the guy who'd hold Serena's coat at cocktail parties, the man she'd leave off the guest list when things got exclusive. One night, she came home late, her hair tousled from the wind, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "The retreat was amazing," she said, dropping her purse on the counter. "I wish you'd been there." I wanted to ask her why she hadn't fought for me to come, why she'd let me be the one left out while she networked and charmed. But I didn't. I just smiled and asked how it went, and she launched into a story about the partners' dinner, about how everyone had laughed at her jokes and praised her presentation. I stood there, nodding, thinking about the deals I'd signed while she'd been gone, thinking about how no one at that dinner had any idea who I really was. Maybe that's what finally broke me, realizing she didn't see me anymore, didn't want to. That she'd built a version of me she could carry around like a good luck charm, safe and predictable and small. That she'd started to believe her own PR. That night, after she went to bed, I pulled up the email from my CFO. Wall Street Journal was dropping a piece on Ironclad's latest valuation, $1 billion, with acquisition rumors swirling. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt tired. Tired of being utility class. Tired of being background. Tired of waiting for someone else to see what I'd built. I could have told Serena then, could have shown her the article, could have made her look at me for the first time in months. But I didn't. I wanted to see what would happen if I stayed silent just a little longer. If she'd notice. Spoiler alert, she didn't. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek and grabbed her briefcase. "Have a good day, Micah," she said, her voice bright and oblivious. "Don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning." I watched her walk out the door, her heels clicking like gunshots in the hallway. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the email again. $1 billion valuation. My name in the fine print. The plumber she'd left off the guest list. I smiled to myself and thought, they'll all find out soon enough. And when they do, I'll be the one holding the invitation they all wanted. I had no plan for revenge. I had no plan at all. I was just tired. Tired of the looks, the dismissals, the polite laughter that rang in my ears every time Serena's colleagues or her family called me the plumber. It was easier that way, I told myself. Less confrontation. Less drama. Let them think they'd mapped me out. Let them keep building their house of illusions. But deep down, I was waiting for the moment when the truth would punch through the pretense like a hammer through glass. That moment came on a Thursday morning. My CFO forwarded an email flagged, high priority. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal had done a deep dive on Ironclad's latest deal with Praxium Holdings. The reporter had uncovered our pipeline diagnostic text track record, the 83% reduction in catastrophic failures, the $12 million saved in Philadelphia, the federal contracts pending approval. She'd pieced together the valuation numbers from investor calls, linked them to public records, and come up with a figure that made my stomach clench. Potential acquisition rumors. Ironclad Systems valued at over $1 billion. It was all there, laid out in black and white, with enough detail to light up every boardroom in the city. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it settle. For years, I built this company in the dark, deflecting questions, letting Serena's world believe I was just another guy with a wrench and a work van. Now the floodlights were about to hit, and I didn't know how I felt about that. I didn't panic. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell my team there'd be time for that later. Instead, I did the one thing I hadn't done in months. I RSVP'd, yes, to Serena's family dinner on Saturday night. Serena had planned it weeks ago, a celebration of her promotion. Her mother had probably already ordered enough wine to drown a small village, and her father would have a toast ready, dripping with the kind of pride that always forgot to mention me. Camille would be there too, no doubt with a new set of Instagram filters ready to document every moment of Serena's ascent. I wondered what they'd all say when the Wall Street Journal hit the breakfast table that morning. Would they be proud? Ashamed? Embarrassed that they hadn't known the truth? Friday came, and the article dropped. Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar plumber. I had to hand it to the journalist. She'd nailed the hook. It was catchy, easy to share. A plumber-turned-tech mogul who'd quietly built an empire while no one was looking. I could already see the headlines spinning across LinkedIn, the whispers at Serena's office. I'd spent so long hiding in plain sight that it felt almost surreal to see my name in print, Michael Landry, founder and CEO. I thought about calling Serena, thought about warning her. But then I remembered all the times she'd called me utility class and left me off her guest lists. I remembered the retreat in Aspen, the cocktail parties, the polite laughter, the tiny cuts that had piled up into a mountain. I decided she could read it the way everyone else would. Saturday night came, and I dressed like I always did. No suit, no tie, just jeans and a button-down shirt. The same Micah I'd always been, the one they dismissed. I wanted them to see him when the truth came out. I wanted them to realize that the man they'd underestimated was the same one who'd built something bigger than all their dinners and promotions combined. The house smelled like garlic and wine when I walked in. Serena's mother was in the kitchen, barking orders at the caterer. Her father was already at the head of the table, glass of scotch in hand, his voice filling the room with the kind of practiced authority that only politicians have. Camille was on the couch, phone in hand, her eyes glued to the screen. Serena greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "Hey, Han. Thanks for coming." Her eyes were bright, her smile perfect. She had no idea. Dinner started like it always did. Her father gave a speech about Serena's achievements, about how proud they all were to have a daughter who'd made partner at Lockridge and Crane. Camille snapped photos. Francine dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. The room was full of laughter and clinking glasses, the sound of a family celebrating its star. Then Serena stood up, glass in hand. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am for all of you," she said, her voice steady, the lawyer in her polished to perfection. "It's been a long road, but I couldn't have done it without my family. And Micah, she paused, giving me that sweet, rehearsed smile. You've always been my rock. The room applauded. I forced a smile. That's when Francine's phone buzzed. She picked it up, I scanning the screen. Her smile faltered. Serena, she said, her voice trembling just a little. Why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal? The room went silent. Even the caterer stopped moving. All eyes turned to me. Serena's face froze. Micah, she asked, her voice cracking. Is that true? I nodded slowly. Yeah. Ironclad is mine. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked at her father. His glass hung in midair, forgotten. Camille's phone was now aimed at me, recording. I wondered what caption she'd use this time. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. But I'm just a plumber, I said, letting the words sink in. Remember? No one laughed. No one moved. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as the guy with the wrench, not as Serena's husband, but as the man who'd built something from nothing. The man they'd underestimated. And in that silence, I realized I didn't need revenge. The truth was enough. The dining room felt like a stage, every eye on me, every breath held as if the world had stopped spinning just to watch me stand there. Serena's father was the first to move, his hand trembling slightly as he set down his glass. Micah, is this some kind of joke? He asked, his voice brittle, like he was trying to convince himself that I couldn't possibly have outgrown his neatly drawn lines. I held his gaze, feeling years of quiet patience harden into something unbreakable. No joke, I said, my voice steady. Ironclad is mine. I built it. The contracts, the technology, the valuation, they're all real. Serena's lips moved like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted between me and the phone in Francine's hand, the one displaying the Wall Street Journal article that had shattered the story she'd told herself about me. I wondered how many times she'd repeated that story at cocktail parties and office events. Micah the plumber, the simple, dependable husband who never demanded too much attention. I wondered if she realized how fragile that story really was. I could feel the room shift, like tectonic plates grinding under the surface, the foundations of their assumptions starting to crack. Camille's phone was still pointed at me, her thumb hovering as if she couldn't decide whether to keep recording or put the damn thing down. I met her gaze and gave her a nod. Let her record. Let the world see what they'd missed. Serena's father leaned forward, his politician's smile gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Why didn't you say anything? He asked, his tone somewhere between disbelief and accusation. I shrugged. I didn't think it mattered to you, I said. Every time I sat at this table, it was about Serena, about her achievements, her promotions. No one asked what I was building. No one cared. His mouth opened, then closed. Francine set her wine glass down with a soft clink that sounded like a confession. We didn't know, she whispered, her voice small, almost childlike. That's the point, I said, letting the words hang in the air. You didn't want to know. You liked the version of me that fit your story. The plumber. The guy who didn't make waves. Serena's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Micah, she started, her voice shaking. Why didn't you tell me? We're a team. We're supposed to share these things. I almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. A team. I repeated, my tone gentle but edged with the truth. Like when you left me off the Aspen retreat. Like when you told your colleagues I was utility class. Her face paled, her mouth trembling. Micah, but I cut her off. Serena, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a supporting character in the story of your success. I gave you that. I let you have your story because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer. The room was silent. Camille's phone was trembling now. I wondered if she was finally seeing her sister for who she really was. Serena's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know, she whispered. I believed her, and that was the saddest part. She hadn't known because she hadn't wanted to. Her father cleared his throat. Well, Micah, he said, forcing a smile that looked like it hurt. Now that we know the truth, perhaps we can work together. There's plenty of opportunities, political partnerships, business deals. I shook my head. That's not why I'm here, I said. I didn't come to make a deal. I came because I was tired of pretending. Francine reached across the table, her manicured hand trembling as she tried to bridge the gap. We always believed in you, Micah, she said, her voice syrupy. Your family. Family. The word tasted bitter. I looked at Serena, her tears rolling down her cheeks, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. Micah, please, she said, her voice a plea now. Don't do this here. We can talk about it later. but I was done with later. I stood, pushing my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood like a final note. No, I said. We're talking about it now. Because for years, I let you define who I was to everyone you cared about. I let you use me as a prop in your story. I let you laugh at me. And I stayed silent because I wanted to believe that the woman I loved would see past the surface. But you didn't. Her sobs were quiet now, the kind that shake your whole body. I wondered if she was crying for me or for herself. I turned to the rest of the table, to Francine and Raymond and Camille. You all got the version of me you deserved, I said, my voice low but unwavering. But the truth was always there if you'd bothered to look. I took one last look at Serena, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd taught me how small people could be. I'm leaving now, I said. Enjoy your dinner. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the applause that never came, the congratulations that never reached my ears. I felt lighter than I had in years. Because finally, they knew. And I didn't need to be their plumber anymore. Questions exploded from every corner of the room. Raymond's voice boomed with disbelief as he demanded, You built that? How? Why didn't you say anything? Francine's eyes were wide, darting between her husband and me as if I'd grown two heads and was about to sprout a third. Camille had stopped recording, her phone now resting in her trembling hands, her Instagram feed momentarily forgotten. And Serena just sat there, frozen, like she was trying to peace talk. I stood by the dining room door, my hands resting on the back of the chair I'd abandoned moments earlier. Yeah, I said, my voice calm. I built it. Ironclad started as an idea scribbled on a napkin in a diner during my last year of grad school. I saw a problem no one was fixing: aging water infrastructure, billions of gallons of water lost every year, and I decided to do something about it. Raymond's jaw clenched, his politician's mask slipping. He caught himself, but the word he'd almost used hung between us. Plumber. I'm what? I asked, my voice steady. A plumber. I let the words settle like dust in the silence. Yeah, I did plumbing work. I still do sometimes. I like the honesty in it, fixing things that are broken. But Ironclad? That's more than pipes. It's predictive analytics, AI, technology that can save cities millions and prevent disasters. It's engineers, coders, field experts. It's the future. And it's mine. Serena's lips parted, but her voice came out as a whisper. Micah, why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? I met her eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me like I was the answer to every question she'd never asked. Because I wanted to know who loved me for me, I said. Not for a billion-dollar company. Not for headlines. Just for who I was when I walked through the door at the end of a long day. I swallowed, feeling the ache that had been building for years. Spoiler alert. You all failed the test. Her face crumpled, tears welling up, but I didn't let myself waver. I turned to Raymond, who was still sputtering, trying to reconcile the man he'd dismissed with the man who now owned a company bigger than any of his political ventures. You never asked me what I did, I said, my tone flat. You asked how my day was, like you already knew the answer was unimportant. His mouth opened, but no words came. I turned to Francine. You treated me like a curiosity, a hobby, a story to tell at brunch with your friends. But you never asked why I kept going back to the lab after midnight, why I spent weekends in meetings instead of on the golf course. Francine's hand shook, the wine glass trembling as if the truth might spill over the rim. Micah, we didn't know, she whispered, her voice small. We thought. You thought I was simple, I said, my voice sharpening. You thought I was the sidekick to Serena's story. But that's the thing about stories, they don't always go the way you expect. I felt the weight of the years pressing against my ribs, the dinners I'd sat through in silence, the jokes I'd laughed at to keep the peace. And I let it all go. Serena's voice cracked. Micah, please, I didn't mean. You didn't mean to see me, I said, cutting her off. You were too busy curating your life to realize there was more to me than the plumber who held your coat. I let the words hang, sharp and final. And that's on you. Raymond cleared his throat, his voice trembling with forced authority. Well, Micah, now that you've revealed yourself, perhaps we can discuss opportunities. There's a lot of potential here. I barked a laugh, cold and humorless. Opportunities? You think I need you? I shook my head. I built this without your approval, without your connections, without your money. I did it because I believed in the work. And I'm not interested in trading that in for a seat at your table. I've got my own table now. Camille, who had been silent through it all, finally spoke. So you really built all that? Her voice was small, like she was asking if the moon was real. I nodded once, and she looked down at her phone, her face pale. Maybe she was realizing that the likes and followers didn't mean much when real work was staring her in the face. I took a breath, feeling the room's weight press in. Look, I said, my tone softening, though not enough to let them off the hook. I didn't come here to rub your faces in it. I came because I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being the man you thought I was instead of the man I am. I looked at Serena, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped. I wanted to know who loved me before the billion, and I got my answer tonight. Her mouth opened, a sob caught in her throat. Micah. I shook my head. I can't be who you need me to be anymore. I can't be small so you can be big. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, the weight I'd carried for too long finally lifting. I hope someday you understand that. The room was silent. Even the caterer, who had been hovering near the kitchen door, had disappeared. It was just us, and the truth, and the cold realization that nothing would ever be the same. I stood a little taller, my spine straight, my heart steady. Ironclad is mine, and so is my future. I turned and walked toward the door, the echoes of my footsteps a rhythm of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward something real. As I reached the hallway, I heard Serena's voice, small and broken. Micah, please. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned just enough to meet her gaze. You always wanted the man who would stand behind you, I said. Turns out, I was always the man who would stand on his own. And then I walked out, leaving behind the questions they'd never thought to ask, the assumptions they'd never bothered to challenge. I didn't need their validation. I had my own, and that was more than enough. Serena tried damage control before I'd even left the driveway. My phone buzzed with her name, 3 times in a row, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She'd already said enough with every polite laugh at my expense, every invitation she'd left me off, every time she'd called me utility class and expected me to smile. Now she wanted to talk. Now she wanted to work through it. I could imagine her scrambling, crafting the perfect apology, her mind spinning a web of justifications and rationalizations. But I was done. The next morning, I woke up to an email from her. Subject line, we need to talk. I opened it, half expecting a full-on apology, but it was a carefully worded plea. Micah, I'm sorry for the way things played out last night. I was blindsided, and I didn't handle it well. I just wish you told me about Ironclad. We could have leveraged your success, used it to build our future together. Let's sit down and talk this through. We're a team. Love, Serena. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Leverage. That was the word that stuck in my throat. She saw my company, my blood and sweat, as a chess piece on her board. A tool for her image, for her brand. I thought of all the times I'd come home late from meetings, exhausted but wired with adrenaline from closing a deal, and she'd barely looked up from her phone. The times she'd called me utility class in front of her colleagues and never once corrected herself. That wasn't a team. That was a transaction. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened the envelope I'd been carrying around for weeks, a separation agreement I'd drawn up after the Aspen retreat, after I'd realized she saw me as an accessory instead of a partner. I'd never planned to use it. I'd kept hoping she'd see me, really see me, but she hadn't. That afternoon, I walked into the living room, and she was waiting, still in her tailored work dress, like she was about to deliver a closing argument. Micah, she started, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. We've been through so much together. Don't let this ruin us. I sat down, my heart steady. Serena, I said quietly, I love the woman I thought you were. I loved the nights you stayed up late studying for the bar, the way you'd light up when you talked about your first big case. But somewhere along the way, you stopped asking about me. You stopped caring about the man behind the work boots. Her lip quivered. That's not fair. It's perfectly fair, I cut in, my tone calm but unwavering. Every time you called me just a plumber, every time you left me off the guest list, every time you told your colleagues I was utility class, you told me exactly who you thought I was. She blinked, tears welling in her eyes. I was under pressure at my job. Your job didn't force you to look down on me, I said. That was your choice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. This is a separation agreement. I signed it already. You can review it with your fancy lawyer friends. Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand. Micah, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can be a team. I pulled my hand away gently. No, I said. You never wanted a team. You wanted a story. You wanted the narrative of the successful partner with the simple, dependable husband. That's not me anymore. Her tears came fast now, rolling down her cheeks. I didn't mean to, but you did, I said, standing up. You meant every word, every laugh, every time you left me in the background. I looked down at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I was done proving anything to her. She tried again, her voice breaking. Please, Micah, don't throw this away. I shook my head. You threw it away every time you chose your image over your husband. I turned and walked toward the door, but paused, looking back at her one last time. You'll be fine, Serena. You've always known how to land on your feet. But I need to be somewhere I can breathe. She sobbed, but I didn't turn back. I walked out, the door closing behind me like the final page of a chapter I'd let drag on too long. Outside, the sun was just setting, painting the sky in colors that felt like freedom. I took a deep breath, the weight of years falling away from my shoulders. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like the man I'd always wanted to be, unapologetic, whole, seen. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know it was her. I silenced it and kept walking. Because some things, once broken, can't be put back together. And I was done letting her hold the pieces. 6 months later, Ironclad Systems was in a completely different league, no longer the quiet giant in the background, but a powerhouse that dominated the conversation in the infrastructure tech sector. We'd finalized the strategic merger with Praxium Holdings, bringing in a valuation north of $1.4 billion. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about the control. The creative freedom, the power to take the technology we developed and make it the gold standard for cities that had been struggling to modernize for decades. I still kept my original office in that same unremarkable building, with its chipped paint and one humming vending machine that made the place feel like home. I'd tried the high-rise thing once, but the glass walls and corner offices just felt like a stage, something that would have made Serena's parents proud but left me cold. That morning, I sat in my office alone, watching the sun break over the skyline like a promise. My team was working out of our new expansion site on the other side of town, a state-of-the-art complex with all the bells and whistles. But I liked the quiet here, the way the walls still held the echoes of our first big wins and our late-night brainstorming sessions. My old work boots were propped under the desk, next to the same metal toolbox I'd carried for years. Some habits die hard. People called me a tech visionary now. Investors wanted my time, my insight, my approval. Every time I walked into a conference room, I saw the recognition in their eyes, the hush that settled over the room before I spoke. I hadn't changed. I still wore the same kind of jeans, still kept a wrench in the trunk of my car, just in case. Because deep down, I was still that guy who'd started this journey by fixing leaky pipes in basements that smelled like mold and old regrets. I'd never be too important to roll up my sleeves and do the work. I'd learned a lot in those 6 months about success, loyalty, and the fragile egos of people who only stand beside you when it suits them. Serena had tried everything. She'd called, texted, emailed. She'd shown up at my office once, all apologies and tears, her voice trembling as she insisted that she hadn't meant to belittle me, that she'd just gotten caught up in her own ambition. She'd said we could be a team again, that my success was her success. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, just sorry that it had all blown up in her face. Sorry that her narrative had fallen apart in front of everyone she cared about. I'd listened. I'd let her speak. And then I told her the same thing I told myself the night I walked out of her parents' dining room. I couldn't be small so she could feel big. She hadn't loved the man I was. She loved the version she'd built for her own story, the one that made her look magnanimous and unstoppable. I didn't hate her for it. I just couldn't go back to being that man. Sometimes I still saw her on social media, glass of wine in hand, captioning her life with carefully chosen words, smiling like the world hadn't shifted under her feet. I wondered if she'd found a new character to fill the role I'd played. I hoped she did, because the truth was, I didn't wish her ill. I just wished her gone from the parts of me she tried to shape. Ironclad's new partnership had opened doors I'd only dreamed of. We were now in 17 cities, with more on the horizon. Our AI systems were revolutionizing water management, cutting costs, preventing disasters, and giving mayors and city planners data they'd never thought possible. Every time we signed a new contract, every time another city manager called to thank me, I felt that same spark I'd felt the first time I'd sketched out the idea on a napkin. One afternoon, As I was reviewing a new deployment plan for Chicago, my CTO, Ravi, knocked lightly and poked his head in. "Hey, boss," he said, his grin wide. "You're going to want to see this." He handed me his tablet, and there on the screen was a glossy feature in Business Insider, "The Plumber Who Built an Empire." I laughed under my breath. The headline felt like an echo of that night at Serena's parents' house, when I'd stood there while the room went silent. "Look at this," Ravi said, excitement buzzing in his voice. "They're calling you the man who changed the way cities manage water forever." I read the article, nodding. It was flattering, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the final quote. Some journalist had dug up one of my old interviews where I'd said, "I'll never stop being a plumber at heart. I'll never stop getting my hands dirty." And I wouldn't, because that was who I was. The guy who fixed things. The guy who saw a problem and refused to look away. Ravi looked at me, his grin fading a little as he caught the expression on my face. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." And I was. That evening, I packed up my bag and headed out. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with pink and gold. I took the long way home, driving through the neighborhoods where I'd once done small plumbing jobs, the streets that had taught me how to navigate more than just pipes, how to navigate people, how to see past the surface. At a red light, I glanced at my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of my reflection, a man in his late 30s, a little older, a little wiser, a lot stronger than the guy who'd stood beside Serena while she called him utility class. I didn't need anyone to tell me my worth anymore. I'd written that story myself, and it didn't need anyone else's approval. When I got home, I kicked off my boots and set my toolbox by the door. Some habits, like I said, die hard. I walked into the kitchen, made a simple dinner, and sat down with a beer in my hand. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, that felt good. Later that night, I took a walk outside. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like shattered glass. I thought about the road I'd traveled, the moments when I'd felt small, the nights I'd wondered if I was enough. I thought about Serena, about the way she'd tried to mold me into something that fit her narrative, and about the way I'd finally broken free. People called me a tech visionary now, a disruptor, a game changer. But in my bones, I was still the same guy with a wrench in his hand, still the same man who believed in fixing things. I just learned that sometimes the thing that needs fixing most is the way people see you, and the way you see yourself. I smiled to myself as I turned back toward the house. Just a plumber, I thought. The man who built an empire while everyone else was looking the other way. And that was enough. Because I didn't need Serena's approval. I didn't need her father's praise or her mother's polite smile. I had my own success, built with my own hands, on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I didn't know what the future would hold, more cities, more contracts, more headlines, maybe. But I knew one thing for certain, I'd face it on my own terms, with my boots on and my head held high. Because that's who I'd always been. Just a plumber. The man who never stopped fixing things.